March 1945, Mississippi. A cold morning that would alter the course of 60 lives forever. The mist hung low over Camp Clinton, like a shroud thick and wet and suffocating. Pine trees surrounded the compound, their dark silhouettes barely visible through the gray dawn. The air smelled of damp earth and distant rain, of fear and uncertainty, of endings and beginnings, all tangled together in the moment before sunrise. 60 German women stood in 4 precise rows outside the medical building. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air. Their hands trembled at their sides. Their hearts hammered against their ribs like prisoners trying to escape. They wore simple gray dresses provided by the American military, ill-fitting and plain. The fabric hung loose on frames that had grown thin during the final desperate months of war. Their faces showed the same hollowness. Dark circles beneath tired eyes. Cheekbones too prominent. Lips pressed thin against teeth that had forgotten how to smile. For 3 weeks they had been here. 3 weeks of regular meals that tasted like guilt. 3 weeks of clean beds that felt like betrayal. 3 weeks of wondering when the other shoe would drop. When the Americans would reveal their true nature. When the torture would begin. This morning they were certain was that moment. Sergeant James Mitchell stood before them, clipboard in hand. He was 43 years old, gray, creeping into his dark hair, a Brooklyn accent softening the harsh German words his grandmother had taught him decades ago. His face showed nothing. No cruelty, no kindness, just the blank professional mask of a soldier following orders. He looked down at his clipboard, then up at the assembled women. His jaw tightened slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent morning with terrible clarity. Macht die Augen zu und schreit nicht. Close your eyes and don't scream. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Several women gasped, the sound sharp as breaking glass. One girl, barely 19 years old, with pale blonde hair and eyes too wide for her thin face, collapsed. Her knees simply gave out. 2 women caught her before she hit the ground, struggling to hold her weight as she shook and sobbed. Others began to cry, silent tears streaming down faces they desperately tried to keep stoic. Years of training, years of being told to be strong, to represent the Reich with dignity, all of it crumbling in the face of pure animal terror. An older woman in the 3rd row, ramrod straight despite her 45 years, clenched her jaw so hard you could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. Her name was Katha Vogler, former military intelligence officer. A woman who had interrogated dozens of prisoners. A woman who knew exactly what those words meant, what they implied, what was coming. But in the front row, standing perfectly still, while chaos erupted around her, was Clara Weber, 26 years old, a nurse. 3 years in German field hospitals had taught her to control her reactions, to observe, to analyze, to look for solutions even when hope seemed impossible. Clara's eyes swept over the medical building. White walls recently painted, windows that sparkled clean in the weak morning light, a red cross on the side, bright and bold. Everything about it looked wrong, too clean, too orderly, too civilized for what everyone believed was about to happen inside. German military hospitals near the end of the war looked nothing like this. They looked like slaughterhouses, blood on the walls, patients screaming in hallways, the stench of infection and gangrene and death, doctors with hollow eyes performing surgeries without anesthesia because the morphine had run out months ago. This building looked like it belonged in peacetime, like it belonged in a world where medicine actually worked, where doctors had time to care, where healing was still possible. That wrongness terrified Clara more than blood would have, because it meant the Americans were sophisticated. They had resources. They had the capability to make torture look clean and professional, to make horror appear medical. Her mind flashed to the stories she had heard, whispered in the barracks late at night when the guards were far away. Stories of medical experiments, of prisoners used to test new weapons, of torture disguised as treatment. She had dismissed them as paranoia, as the desperate fantasies of frightened women looking for patterns in chaos. But now, standing in the morning mist, with those words hanging in the air like an executioner's blade, doubt crept in, cold and vicious. What if the stories were true? Her hands clenched into fists, fingernails dug into palms. The small, sharp pain grounded her, reminded her she was still alive, still here, still capable of feeling something other than fear. But fear was winning. Because Clara knew something the others did not. Something that made this moment infinitely worse. She knew exactly how penicillin worked. How antibiotics could cure infections that would otherwise be fatal. How vitamin injections could reverse severe malnutrition. How modern medicine properly applied could save lives that would have been lost just a decade earlier. She also knew how those same tools could be perverted. How drugs could be tested on unwilling subjects. How medical knowledge could be weaponized. How doctors could become monsters. And if the Americans were about to demonstrate that, if they were about to show her that her profession, her calling, could be twisted into something evil, then the last thing she believed in would die with her in that white building. The door opened. 3 figures emerged, white coats over military uniforms, polished shoes, clean hands. They carried black leather medical bags, the kind doctors had carried for generations. Instruments of healing, or instruments of horror. It was impossible to tell from a distance. The oldest of the 3, a man with gray hair and a calm professional expression, looked out at the assembled women. His eyes swept over them without emotion, without anger or hatred or sadistic pleasure, just clinical detachment. Somehow that was worse. Torture performed with emotion might be understandable, the product of rage or revenge or fear, but torture performed with that kind of cold professional calm, that was the stuff of nightmares. Beside Clara, a woman whispered in German, her voice breaking, "They are going to kill us, all of us, just like they killed the Jews." Another voice barely audible, "No, they will make us wish for death first." Clara wanted to tell them to be quiet, to be brave, to remember their training, but her throat felt too tight. The words would not come. Because deep down beneath the nurse's training and the rational analysis, she was just as terrified as they were. The door stood open now, waiting. A threshold between the known and the unknown, between life and whatever came after. Sergeant Mitchell consulted his clipboard again. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. Frida Zimmerman. The woman in the second row, 30 years old with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped forward. Every movement was mechanical, like a puppet on strings, like someone walking to her own execution because the alternative was worse. She walked past Clara. Their eyes met for just a moment. In that instant, Clara saw everything. The terror, the resignation, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this would not be as bad as they feared. Then Frida was at the door. She paused at the threshold. Her hand gripped the doorframe so tightly her knuckles went white. Behind her, 59 women held their breath. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the morning silence. And then, nothing. Just silence. Long, terrible silence that stretched like taffy. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became eternities. No sound came from inside the building. No screams, no cries, no thuds or crashes or any indication of struggle. The women waited, muscles locked, breathing shallow, every nerve screaming. Some began to interpret the silence. "They killed her," someone whispered, so quietly we could not hear. "They are that efficient." "No," another voice countered. "They are keeping her for experiments. We will never see her again." Clara's analytical mind worked through the possibilities. If they were torturing Frida, there would be sounds. Soundproofing was nearly impossible, especially in a wooden building like this. She would hear something. Anything. If they had killed her, why wait? Why take 15 minutes? 20 minutes? Something else was happening. But what the possibilities her mind generated were somehow worse than the screaming she had expected. Because at least screaming would be known, would be comprehensible. The silence was alien, unknowable, terrifying in its very normalcy. 23 minutes after Frida had entered, the door opened. She walked out, alive, not bleeding, not crying, not visibly injured in any way. But her face showed something that made no sense, not pain or trauma or the hollow shock of torture. Instead, her expression was one of complete and utter bewilderment, like someone who had just witnessed something that violated every expectation, something that made no sense whatsoever. She walked past the line of waiting women without speaking. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing, trying to process something her brain refused to accept. Someone grabbed her arm as she passed. Was this passiert? What happened? Frida just shook her head. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Ich verstehe es nicht. I do not understand. Then she kept walking, leaving 59 women more terrified than before. Because at least torture would have made sense. At least horror would have been expected. But confusion, bewilderment, that was something else entirely. Sergeant Mitchell read the next name. Clara Weber. Clara's heart stopped, then started again too fast, too hard. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The world reduced to that open door, that threshold, that moment of irrevocable commitment. She stepped forward. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her body moved on autopilot, carried by 3 years of military discipline and nursing training. When a crisis came, you did not freeze. You acted, even when every cell in your body screamed to run. She reached the door. The wood was painted white, clean and fresh. Up close, she could see the grain beneath the paint, could see the brass handle polished to a shine, could see her own distorted reflection in its surface. Behind her, 58 women watched, some with pity, some with relief that it was not them, some with the hollow certainty that their turn would come soon enough. Clara took a breath. It shook going in, steadied slightly coming out. She stepped through the door, and everything she had believed about the world, about her enemies, about the nature of war itself, all of it shattered in the next 10 seconds. The interior of the medical building was like stepping into another world, another time, another reality entirely. The floors were not just clean, they were polished, linoleum that reflected the overhead lights like still water. The smell hit her immediately, not blood and carbolic acid, not infection and death, but antiseptic, clean and sharp and almost sweet. The smell of a functioning hospital. The smell of medicine that worked. The walls were painted white and showed no signs of blood or dirt or the desperate chaos of wartime medicine. Bright electric lights hung from the ceiling, powered by a generator that hummed quietly somewhere in the building. After years of working by candlelight and lanterns, the brightness was almost painful. 3 examination tables lined one wall, each covered with crisp white sheets. Metal cabinets stood against the opposite wall, their doors closed but gleaming. A desk sat in the corner with neat stacks of papers and files. Everything was organized. Everything was in its place. Everything spoke of order and professionalism and resources. For a prison camp medical facility, it looked impossibly well equipped. The 3 figures in white coats stood waiting. As Clara's eyes adjusted to the light, she saw them clearly for the first time. The oldest was perhaps 55, gray hair, neatly combed, gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather, kind and patient and utterly unthreatening, which meant nothing. Clara knew from experience that the worst monsters often had the kindest faces. The second was younger, maybe 35, with Chinese features and careful, precise movements. He wore wire-rimmed glasses identical to the older doctor, and his hands were those of a surgeon. Steady, controlled, capable of incredible delicacy or incredible damage. The third was a woman, 32 perhaps, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, Hispanic features. Brown eyes that seemed warm but could easily be assessing, calculating, looking for weaknesses. The older doctor stepped forward. When he spoke, it was in English. Sergeant Mitchell, who had followed Clara inside, translated into German. Good morning, I am Dr. Samuel Thompson. This is Dr. David Chen and Dr. Maria Rodriguez. We are here to perform a medical examination. We will check your overall health, take your temperature and blood pressure, look at your teeth and throat, and listen to your heart and lungs. We will also check for any signs of malnutrition or disease that need treatment. Do you understand? Clara nodded slowly. Her mind was racing, trying to process the words, trying to reconcile them with everything she had been told to expect. A medical examination. Just a medical examination. Not experiments, not torture, not horror. But that could not be true. It had to be a trick, a way to lower their guard before the real horror began. That was the only explanation that made sense. Dr. Thompson seemed to sense her fear. He spoke again, his voice calm and steady even before Mitchell translated. We are not here to hurt you. We are here to help you. I know you are afraid. I know you have heard stories about what might happen to you, but I promise you on my honor as a physician that we will not harm you. We will only examine you to make sure you are healthy. Clara wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to believe that gentle voice and those kind eyes. But belief required trust, and trust had died somewhere in the ruins of Europe. She stood very still as Dr. Thompson approached with a stethoscope, the cold metal pressed against her chest through the thin fabric of her dress. She closed her eyes, waiting for pain, waiting for the trick to reveal itself, waiting for the moment when kindness became cruelty. But there was no pain, just the doctor's voice, patient and professional. Breathe deeply. She did. Again. She complied. Good. Now hold your breath. The stethoscope moved to different positions on her chest, her back, under her arms. Each time Dr. Thompson listened with the focused concentration of a true professional, making small sounds of consideration, occasionally frowning. That frown made Clara's heart rate spike. She knew that expression. She had worn it herself countless times when examining patients in Germany. It was the look of a medical professional who had found something concerning. Dr. Chen stepped forward with a small flashlight. I am going to look at your eyes now, he said through Mitchell. Please look straight ahead. The light was bright but not painful. He examined one eye, then the other, made notes on a clipboard. His face revealed nothing. Dr. Rodriguez checked Clara's temperature with a thermometer under her tongue, felt her neck glands checking for swelling, looked in her ears with an otoscope. Every movement was professional, clinical, careful, not cruel. It was real. This was actual medical care. Proper medical care of the kind Clara had not seen in over a year. The kind that had become impossible in Germany as resources dwindled and chaos spread and the entire system collapsed under the weight of war. Dr. Thompson pressed the stethoscope against Clara's back again. Breathe deeply, he instructed. She did. He listened for a long moment. His frown deepened. He moved the stethoscope to another spot. Again. Another deep breath, another long moment of listening. His expression grew more serious. He stepped back and spoke to the other doctors in English. They exchanged words Clara could not understand, but she could read body language. She had spent 3 years reading the unspoken communication between medical professionals in crisis situations. Something was wrong. They had found something. Fear came flooding back. Not the fear of torture, but a different kind of fear. The fear of a medical professional who recognizes the symptoms of something serious, something potentially fatal if left untreated. Dr. Chen wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Clara's arm and pumped the rubber bulb. The cuff tightened, then slowly released. He read the gauge and made another note. His expression gave nothing away. Dr. Rodriguez examined Clara's hands, turning them over, looking at her fingernails. She pressed on the nail beds and watched how quickly the color returned. Another test Clara recognized. Checking circulation, looking for signs of anemia. The thoroughness was almost frightening. These doctors were not performing a cursory check. They were conducting a complete professional medical evaluation. Dr. Thompson turned to her. Through Mitchell, he said, "You have fluid in your lungs. It is not severe yet, but it could become serious if left untreated. You also show signs of malnutrition, though you are improving. Your blood pressure is slightly low. Do you have a cough?" Clara nodded. She had been coughing for weeks, but everyone coughed in winter. Everyone was tired. Everyone felt weak. That was just life during war. You pushed through it. You did not complain. You certainly did not admit weakness to your captors. "We are going to treat you," Dr. Thompson said. His voice remained calm, professional. "You will receive antibiotics. This is medicine that will help your body fight the infection in your lungs. You will also receive vitamin supplements to help with the malnutrition. We want you to return here every day for the next week so we can monitor your progress. Do you understand?" Clara stared at him. Her mind refused to accept what she was hearing. Treatment, medicine, monitoring her progress. This was not how you treated enemy prisoners. This was how you treated patients. Human beings who deserve care and healing. Dr. Rodriguez opened one of the metal cabinets. Inside were rows of medicine bottles, bandages, syringes, and other medical supplies. All of it clean, all of it organized, all of it available in quantities that would have seemed like fantasy in a German military hospital. She took out a bottle of pills and counted several into a small paper envelope. She handed it to Clara with instructions carefully translated by Sergeant Mitchell. Take one pill 3 times a day, after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner. Do not skip any doses. The medicine will make you feel better, but you must take all of it even after you start feeling better. If you stop too soon, the infection can come back stronger. Do you understand? Clara took the envelope, but her hands shook. Not from fear this time, but from shock. She looked down at the pills through the paper. Real medicine, antibiotics, penicillin. In Germany, such medicine had become rarer than gold by the end of the war. Soldiers died from infections that could have been cured with a few pills. Children died from diseases that medicine could have prevented. And here, the enemy was giving it to her, a prisoner, a German, someone who had been part of the machine that tried to destroy them. You can go now, Dr. Thompson said. His voice was still kind, still professional. Send in the next woman, and please tell them not to be afraid. We are here to help, not to hurt. Clara walked toward the door in a daze. Her mind could not process what had just happened, could not reconcile the reality of professional medical care with years of propaganda about American barbarism. At the door, she paused and looked back. Dr. Thompson was washing his hands in a sink, preparing for the next patient. Dr. Chen was making notes in a file. Dr. Rodriguez was organizing supplies. They looked like doctors. They acted like doctors. They had treated her like doctors treat patients, not like captors treat prisoners, not like enemies treat enemies, but like human beings treating another human being who needed medical care. The implications were staggering, terrifying, world-shattering. Because if this was true, if the Americans really were providing professional medical care to German prisoners, then what else had been a lie? What other propaganda had she believed? What other truths had been twisted into weapons of hatred? Clara stepped back into the morning light. The mist had burned off. Weak sunlight filtered through the pine trees. The world looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes earlier, but nothing would ever be the same again. She walked past the line of waiting women. They turned to look at her, fear and questions written on every face. She looked down at the envelope in her hand, at the small white pills that could save her life, at the physical proof that everything she had been taught might be wrong. Clara, a voice beside her, Frida, the first woman who had gone in, her eyes were still wide with confusion. They examined you. They did not hurt you. No, Clara whispered. They did not hurt me. They found an infection. They gave me medicine. Medicine? Frida's voice rose in disbelief. Real medicine, not poison. Penicillin, Clara said. She held up the paper envelope as proof. For my lungs. They said I have fluid and need treatment. The two women stood in silence. Around them, more women came out of the medical building. Each one wore the same expression of shock and confusion. Each one carried something. Pills, vitamin bottles. In one case, a bottle of cough syrup. One woman had a fresh bandage on her arm where the doctors had treated an infected cut. As the morning went on and all 60 women cycled through the medical building, the initial terror began to transform. Not into relief exactly. Relief would come later. This was something harder to name. Cognitive dissonance. The complete inability to reconcile what they had been told to expect with what was actually happening. They had been told to close their eyes and not scream. They had expected horror. They had prepared for pain. Instead, they received medical care that was better than what most of them had seen in years. Better than what they had received from their own military. Better than what was available to German civilians dying in bombed-out cities. The contrast was so extreme that their minds struggled to accept it. It was easier to believe in torture than to accept this kindness, because torture made sense. It fit the narrative they had been taught. It confirmed what they already believed about their enemies. But kindness, unexpected professional, thorough medical kindness, that shattered everything. That forced them to ask questions they were not ready to answer. That opened doors they were terrified to walk through. By noon, all 60 women had been examined. They gathered in small groups around the camp, talking in low voices, processing what had happened. trying to make sense of the senseless. And in that processing, in that struggle to understand, the first cracks appeared in the foundation of everything they had believed. Some of those cracks would widen into chasms. Some would lead to transformation and understanding. Others would lead to resistance and denial and pain. But on that cold March morning in Mississippi, as 60 German women held medicine in their hands and questions in their hearts, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The afternoon sun broke through the Mississippi clouds, turning the pine forest into columns of gold and shadow. Inside the women's barracks, 60 voices argued in low, urgent German. Clara sat on her bunk, the envelope of penicillin tablets clutched in her hand. Around her, the other women formed small clusters, processing what had happened, trying to make sense of medicine given freely, of professional care provided by those they had been taught to hate. Some were beginning to believe, to hope, to consider that perhaps the propaganda had been wrong. Others were not convinced. "You are all fools." The voice cut through the murmuring like a blade, sharp, cold, certain. Kathy Vogler stood in the center of the room, 45 years old, ramrod straight despite the gray prison dress. Her face was all angles and hardness. 15 years in military intelligence had taught her to see patterns others missed, to recognize manipulation, to never ever trust the enemy. "You think they gave us medicine because they care about us?" Her voice dripped with contempt. "You think they examined us like proper doctors because they see us as human beings?" The room fell silent. Even those who had begun to hope felt doubt creep back in, because Katha spoke with the authority of experience, of someone who had seen how psychological warfare worked, who had used it herself. "This is textbook psychological manipulation," Katha continued. She paced as she spoke like a professor lecturing students. "Phase 1. Establish trust through unexpected kindness. Make the prisoners believe their captors are benevolent. Make them grateful for basic human decency." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Phase 2. Once trust is established, extract information. They will ask questions, casual questions, about our work, our units, our knowledge of military operations. And because they gave us medicine, because they were kind to us, we will answer. We will betray our country without even realizing it." Several women nodded. The logic was compelling. It fit what they had been taught about enemy tactics. It made sense in a way that simple kindness did not. "Phase 3, Ketha's voice grew harder. "Once they have what they need, the experiments begin, or we are simply disposed of. The medicine they gave us could be anything: poison, drugs to make us compliant. We have no way to verify what is in those pills." She pointed at Clara's envelope, at the white tablets that promised healing. "Do not take their medicine. Do not trust their kindness. This is a trap, and we are walking into it with our eyes open like lambs to slaughter." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. 20 women who had begun to hope now looked uncertain, frightened, wondering if they had been fooled. But Clara Weber was not convinced. She stood slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Frau Vogler, I disagree." Every eye in the room turned to her. Ketha's expression sharpened, assessing, calculating. "You disagree." Ketha's tone made it sound absurd. "On what basis, Frau Weber? Are you an intelligence officer? Do you have experience with enemy psychological operations?" "No," Clara said quietly. "I am a nurse, and I know what I saw in that medical building." She took a breath, steadied herself. 3 years of working in field hospitals had taught her to trust her medical judgment, even when others doubted, even when the evidence contradicted common sense. "Dr. Thompson examined me properly. I know the difference between a real medical examination and a performance. I have conducted hundreds of examinations myself. His technique was correct. His diagnosis was accurate. I have fluid in my lungs. I have felt it for weeks. The cough, the pain when I breathe deeply. These are real symptoms, and his treatment is appropriate." She held up the envelope. "This is penicillin, real penicillin. I have used it in German hospitals. I recognize the tablets. The dosage is correct. The instructions are proper medical protocol. If they wanted to poison us, they would not need to create an elaborate deception." "You are naive," Ketha said flatly. You see what you want to see, what you need to see, because accepting their kindness is easier than accepting that we are still prisoners, that we are still at their mercy. Clara felt heat rise in her chest, anger cutting through fear. Naive, her voice rose despite her attempt to control it. My sister died 3 months ago. Sophie. She was 18 years old. She died from an infected cut on her leg because we had no penicillin. My mother wrote to me. She described how Sophie screamed for 4 days, how she died in agony because Germany had no medicine left to give her. Her hands shook as she raised the envelope higher. This medicine could have saved her. This medicine that the Americans are giving to me, their prisoner, their enemy. You call me naive, I am facing reality, Frau Vogler. The reality that our own country let its children die while the enemy provides better care to prisoners than we provided to our own people. The words hung in the air like smoke. Several women looked down. Others wiped their eyes. Because Clara was not the only one who had received letters from home. Letters describing hunger, disease, death from preventable causes while the war machine consumed everything. Ketha's expression did not change. If anything, it grew harder. Your pain is clouding your judgment, she said. The Americans are exploiting your grief, making you grateful for medicine they could easily have given, but chose to withhold until now. This is manipulation, pure and simple, and the fact that you cannot see it proves my point. She turned to address the room. Those of you who want to believe them, go ahead. Take their pills, trust their kindness, but do not be surprised when the real purpose reveals itself, when they come asking questions, when they want payment for their generosity. She looked back at Clara. Some of us will not be so foolish. Some of us will remember that they are still the enemy, that this war is not over, that surrendering our dignity is not worth a few pills and false hope. The room divided in that moment, not cleanly, not completely, but the fault line was there, visible and growing. 35 women moved closer to Clara. They included Frida, whose infected tooth had been treated. Lena, the youngest, whose anemia was being addressed with iron supplements. Greta, the sharp-eyed typist from Berlin, who had watched the doctors carefully and seen only professionalism. 25 women stayed near Keta. They included several of the older prisoners, those who had been part of the military longer, those whose faith in the Reich, though battered, still held firm, those for whom accepting American kindness meant accepting that everything they had believed was wrong. The divide was not about intelligence or courage. It was about what each woman could afford to believe, what truth she could bear to face. For some, hope was possible. For others, it was too dangerous, too painful, too much like betrayal. Clara looked at the women on her side, then at those with Keta. She felt the weight of division, of conflict that would not be resolved with words. I am taking the medicine, she said quietly. If I am wrong, I will die. But if you are wrong, Frau Vogler, others will die, and that is something I cannot accept. She turned and walked to her bunk, sat down, opened the envelope, took out one white tablet. Every eye in the room watched as she placed it on her tongue and swallowed. Nothing happened. No immediate collapse. No convulsions. Just a woman taking medicine prescribed by a doctor. But the act itself was revolutionary. A declaration. A line drawn. Keta watched with an expression that might have been pity or contempt or something darker. We will see, she said softly. We will see who is right. Then she turned to her own supporters. Do not take their medicine, she instructed. Share it among yourselves if you must, but do not follow their dosage instructions. Do not return for follow-up examinations. Do not give them what they want. And so the battle lines were drawn, not with weapons, not with violence, but with something perhaps more fundamental, with the question of whether mercy from an enemy could be real, whether kindness could exist in war, whether the propaganda that had shaped their understanding of the world was truth or lie. The next week would test those divisions in ways none of them could predict. As the sun set over Camp Clinton that evening, Clara lay on her bunk and felt the medicine begin its work. Or perhaps she imagined it. Perhaps it was just the power of hope, of believing that healing was possible. Outside, guards changed shifts. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played American music. The pine trees swayed in the evening breeze. The world continued its inexorable turn. And in the medical building, Dr. Samuel Thompson sat at his desk writing notes and patient files. 60 women, 60 examinations, 60 diagnoses and treatment plans. He did not know that his actions had created a division, that his professional medical care had become a weapon in a conflict he never intended to start. He knew only that he had taken an oath to heal, to help, to see patients as human beings deserving of care. What those patients did with that care was beyond his control. But 3 days later, on a cool spring morning, he would receive a visitor. And in that conversation, the true complexity of mercy would reveal itself. Clara returned to the medical building as instructed. Her cough had improved noticeably. The pain in her chest when breathing deeply had lessened. She could feel her body responding to the antibiotics, to the vitamins, to regular food and rest and medical care. It was working. The medicine was real. The treatment was genuine. She wanted to feel relief, gratitude, joy at the simple fact of healing. Instead, she felt guilt so crushing she could barely breathe. Because every breath that came easier was a breath Sophie would never take. Every pill she swallowed was medicine her sister died without. Every day she grew stronger was a day further from the girl who had screamed in agony because Germany had nothing left to give her. Survivor's guilt, they would call it decades later. But in that moment, Clara had no name for the feeling, only the terrible weight of living when someone she loved had died, of receiving care when her family received nothing, of healing in the land of her enemies while her people suffered in the ruins of their homeland. Dr. Thompson noticed immediately. He was examining her lungs, the stethoscope cold against her back, when he paused. "Your lungs are clearing well," he said through Sergeant Mitchell's translation. "The infection is responding to treatment. But something else is wrong. I can hear it in your breathing. Not physical, emotional." Clara said nothing. What could she say? That she was angry at him for healing her, that she wished the medicine had failed, that she resented being alive. Dr. Thompson set down the stethoscope. He pulled up a chair and sat facing her. His brown eyes were kind but penetrating, the eyes of someone who had seen suffering before and knew its many forms. "You are carrying guilt," he said gently. "Guilt for surviving, for being healthy while others suffer. Am I correct?" Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I understand," Dr. Thompson said. "More than you might think." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Worn at the edges, clearly handled often, he showed it to Clara, a young woman in an army nurse's uniform, maybe 28 years old. Dark hair, warm smile, the same kind eyes as her father. "This is my daughter," Dr. Thompson said quietly. "Rachel, she is a nurse with the Army Medical Corps in France. Right now, at this very moment, she is treating wounded soldiers in a field hospital near the German border." He paused. When he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. "Some of those soldiers are German, enemy soldiers, men who may have killed Americans, men whose comrades may have killed her friends. But she treats them anyway, because that is what nurses do. That is what healers do." He looked directly at Clara. "Every day I wonder if one of those German soldiers will kill her. If one of them will see an opportunity and take it. If one of them will decide that an American nurse does not deserve mercy. Every single day I live with that fear." Clara's eyes widened. She had not considered this, had not thought about what it meant for Dr. Thompson to heal German prisoners while his own daughter tended to German wounded. "I am healing you," Dr. Thompson continued, "because I hope that somewhere in Germany, a doctor or nurse is doing the same for any American who needs it. I am showing you mercy because I pray someone is showing mercy to my daughter." He put the photograph back in his pocket. "But more than that, I am healing you because it is right. Because when I look at you, I do not see an enemy. I see a patient who needs medical care. I see a young woman who has already suffered enough. I see someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend." His voice grew firmer. "Your guilt is understandable, but it is also unnecessary. Your sister did not die because you lived. She died because war is cruel and medicine was scarce, and circumstances were beyond anyone's control. You surviving does not diminish her death. You healing does not dishonor her memory." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She fought them back, but they came anyway. silent, hot, releasing something that had been locked tight since the day she received her mother's letter. "What would your sister want?" Dr. Thompson asked gently. "Would she want you to refuse treatment, to suffer because she suffered? Or would she want you to live, to use this second chance to help others, to become the nurse you were meant to be?" The question broke something in Clara. The tears came faster, her shoulders shook. Through Sergeant Mitchell, Dr. Thompson continued. But his voice had a new quality, not just professional kindness, but personal understanding, the empathy of one healer speaking to another. "I became a doctor because my brother died of pneumonia when I was 15. We lived on a farm in Iowa. The nearest doctor was 20 miles away. By the time we got my brother to him, it was too late. Nothing could be done." He took a breath. "For years I felt guilty. I was healthy. He was dead. I got to live my life. He got nothing. But then I realized something. My surviving meant I could prevent other families from losing their children. My guilt could become purpose. My pain could become healing." He leaned forward. "You are a nurse, Clara. You understand what it means to heal, to take away suffering, to give people a chance at life. Your sister is gone, and that is a tragedy. But you are here, you are alive. You have skills and knowledge and the capacity to help others." His eyes held hers. "Do not waste your life drowning in guilt. Use it. Honor your sister by living fully, by helping others the way you could not help her, by becoming the best nurse you can be. That is the only way to make her death mean something." The words settled into Clara like seeds into soil. She could not accept them fully. Not yet. The guilt was too fresh, the pain too raw. But for the first time since receiving her mother's letter, she felt something other than crushing despair. She felt the possibility of purpose. The examination finished in silence. Dr. Thompson gave her another week's supply of penicillin. Dr. Rodriguez added a multivitamin. Dr. Chen checked her blood pressure and pronounced it improved. As Clara left the medical building, she passed several other women from her group. They exchanged small smiles, quiet acknowledgments of shared experience. But when she returned to the barracks, she found chaos. Lena, the 19-year-old with pale blonde hair, lay on her bunk convulsing. Her skin was gray, her lips had a blue tinge. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth. Several women clustered around her panicking, speaking rapidly in German, calling for help. Clara dropped her medicine and rushed over. Her nurse training took over instantly. She checked Lena's pulse, rapid and thready, felt her forehead, burning with fever, looked at her eyes, pupils dilated and unfocused. "How long has she been like this?" Clara demanded. 10 minutes, someone said. "Maybe 15. We thought she was sleeping." Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Seizure, infection, some kind of toxic reaction. But to what? Then she saw the empty envelope on the floor beside Lena's bunk, the one that had contained iron supplements and antibiotics for her anemia. "Did she take her medicine?" Clara asked urgently. The women exchanged glances, uncomfortable, frightened. "She is with Ketha's group," Frida said quietly. "She was not supposed to take it." Understanding crashed over Clara like ice water. Lena had been refusing treatment, sharing her pills with others as Ketha instructed, not following the prescribed dosage. Her anemia had been severe to begin with. Without proper treatment, it had grown worse, and now her body was shutting down. "We need to get her to the medical building now," Clara said. "She is dying." She moved to lift Lena, but hands grabbed her arms, pulled her back. Ketha stood in the doorway. Her face was hard, resolved. "No," she said. "Lena stays here." Clara stared at her in disbelief. "She is dying, Ketha. Look at her. Without immediate treatment, she will be dead in an hour." "Then she dies as a German," Ketha said coldly. "Not as a laboratory rat for the Americans." Something snapped in Clara. All the fear and guilt and grief of the past weeks crystallized into pure rage. "You are killing her," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is not about ideology or loyalty or any of your intelligence games. This is about a 19-year-old girl dying because you are too proud to accept help. This is about maintaining our dignity," Ketha shot back. "About not surrendering to enemy manipulation." "Dignity," Clara's voice rose. There is no dignity in letting someone die from treatable illness. There is no honor in sacrificing a girl because you cannot admit you might be wrong. She moved toward Lena again. Keta blocked her path. I will not allow it, Keta said. Clara looked at the older woman, at the rigid certainty in her face, at the fear masquerading as strength. And Clara understood. This was not really about Lena. It was about Keta, about what she could afford to believe, about what admission of American decency would mean for everything she had spent her life defending. But understanding did not mean acceptance. Get out of my way, Clara said quietly. No. They stood facing each other, two women who had survived hell, who had lost everything, who had nothing left but their convictions. Behind them, Lena's breathing grew more labored, more desperate. Time was running out. Clara made her decision. She lunged forward, shoving Kethy aside with strength born of desperation. Ketha stumbled, caught herself, reached for Clara's arm. They grappled, not violently, not with intent to harm, but with the struggle of two people fighting for different versions of survival. Other women rushed forward. Some tried to separate them. Others held them back. The barracks erupted into shouting, chaos. Fear and anger and helplessness all tangled together. Then a whistle cut through the noise. Sharp, commanding. Sergeant Mitchell stood in the doorway, two guards behind him. What is happening here? He demanded in German. Clara broke free from the tangle of bodies. She pointed at Lena, still convulsing on the bunk. She needs medical attention immediately. She will die without it. Mitchell assessed the situation in seconds. He had seen enough medical emergencies to recognize one. Get her to the hospital, he ordered the guards. They moved forward. Keta stepped into their path. She is not going anywhere. Mitchell's expression hardened. This is not a request, Frau Vogler. Stand aside. You will have to force me. For a long moment, they stood in tableau. Two guards, one sergeant, one defiant prisoner, and behind them all, a girl dying while ideology battled mercy. Mitchell nodded to his guards. They gently but firmly moved Kethy aside. She struggled, but they were stronger, trained, professional. They lifted Lena carefully. She moaned, her eyes rolling back. Her breathing rattled in her chest. As they carried her toward the door, Ketha's voice rang out. You have all witnessed this. They are taking her by force. When she does not return, remember that I tried to save her. Clara stood trembling. Her hands were shaking. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady when she spoke. If Lena does not return, it will be because you killed her, not the Americans. You. The guards carried Lena out into the afternoon sun. Mitchell followed, pausing at the door to look back. Dr. Thompson will treat her, he said. That is all he does. Treat the sick, whether you choose to believe it or not. Then he was gone. The barracks fell into shocked silence. The divide that had been growing for days was now a chasm. Uncrossable. Absolute. Clara looked around at the faces of the women. Some showed relief, others fear. A few reflected back Kethy's certainty that this was all manipulation, all part of some larger plan. But most showed confusion, uncertainty, the terrible doubt that comes when what you believe crashes against what you witness. Ketha turned to her remaining supporters. Perhaps 15 women still stood with her. The rest had drifted away, unsure, uncommitted. They will not bring her back, Keta said. But her voice had lost some of its certainty, some of its power. Clara said nothing. There was nothing left to say. She returned to her bunk, sat down, picked up the envelope of medicine she had dropped, and waited. Because now it was not just about medicine, not just about treatment. It was about what truth they would choose to accept, what reality they would allow themselves to see. In 3 days, they would have their answer. In 3 days, Lena would return. And when she did, everything would change again. 4 days passed in unbearable tension. The barracks felt smaller, felt the air heavier. Conversations happened in whispers. Women divided not just by belief, but by fear, by the terrible uncertainty of waiting. Keta maintained her rigid certainty, but cracks were showing. She ate little, slept less, stood at the window staring toward the medical building, as if she could will Lena back through sheer force of conviction. Clara worked through her final days of antibiotics. Her cough had vanished. Her breathing came easy and deep. The medicine had done exactly what Dr. Thompson promised it would. But the physical healing only made the emotional pain sharper. Each healthy breath felt like theft. On the fourth day, just after breakfast, the barracks door opened. Lena walked in, alive. More than alive. She looked healthier than she had in months. Color in her cheeks, brightness in her eyes. She moved with steady steps instead of the wavering shuffle of severe anemia. Her blonde hair had been washed and braided. She wore a clean dress. She carried a small bag of medicine and a letter. The room froze. Every woman turned to stare. Even Katha went rigid, her knuckles white against the window frame. Lena stood in the doorway, blinking in the dim barracks light after days in the hospital. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been in months. "They saved my life," she said simply. "Dr. Rodriguez stayed with me for 2 nights. They gave me blood. Iron through a needle in my arm. Oxygen when I could not breathe. Medicine I cannot even name." She looked directly at Keta. "They treated me like I mattered. Like my life had value. Not because of who I was or what country I came from, but because I was a human being who was dying and they could help." She held up the letter. "Dr. Rodriguez wrote this. She asked me to read it to all of you." Silence. Absolute and complete. Lena opened the letter with trembling hands, cleared her throat, read in careful English, first then translated to German. To the women of Barrack 7, Lena had severe pneumonia complicated by critical anemia. Without immediate treatment, she would have died within 6 to 8 hours of her collapse. We treated her with penicillin through injection, iron transfusion, oxygen support, and intravenous fluids. She responded well to treatment and is now healthy enough to return to normal activities. Lena paused, took a breath, continued. "I am writing this not to prove anything, but to explain what happened. Medical care is not politics. It is not manipulation or psychological warfare. It is simply one human being helping another human being to live. If any of you are sick and refuse treatment because of fear or suspicion, please know this. We took an oath to heal. We will keep that oath for anyone who needs it. Enemy or friend, German or American. It makes no difference to us. A patient is a patient. A life is a life. That is all." When the letter was signed, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, with the date and official medical course stamp, Lena folded the letter carefully, placed it on the table in the center of the room where everyone could see it. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I believed Katha because I was afraid. Because accepting their kindness meant admitting our propaganda lied to us. But lying to ourselves will not change the truth." She looked around the room. "They are not monsters. They are not conducting experiments. They are doctors doing what doctors do. And if we refuse their help out of pride or fear, ether or loyalty to ideas that were never true in the first place, then we are the ones hurting ourselves, not them." The impact was seismic. Within an hour, 15 of Ketha's remaining supporters had quietly asked for medical appointments. By evening, only 5 women still held to the older woman's position. By the next day, just 3. Katha herself said nothing. She sat on her bunk, staring at nothing, her face a mask of stone. But Clara, watching her carefully with a nurse's trained observation, saw the truth beneath the facade. Katha was breaking, not from being wrong, but from what being wrong meant, from the implications that spread like cracks through ice. If the Americans were decent, then what did that say about Germany? If the enemy showed more humanity than her own side, what did that mean for everything she had believed, everything she had served, everything she had sacrificed? Clara wanted to feel vindication. Wanted to say, "I told you so," wanted to claim victory in their bitter struggle. Instead, she felt only sadness, because she understood that Ketha's resistance had never really been about medicine. It had been about survival of a different kind, the survival of identity, of purpose, of the self you had built over decades of believing certain truths. And watching that self crumble was not victory, it was tragedy. The weeks that followed brought an uneasy peace. The medical examinations continued, treatments progressed, health improved across all 60 women. Weight returned to thin frames, color to pale faces, energy to exhausted bodies. The American food helped. Regular meals, fresh vegetables, meat more often than not, bread that was soft and plentiful. It was more than many of them had eaten in years, more than was available to civilians in Germany, more than German soldiers in the field were receiving. That knowledge sat heavy in every stomach. Every meal tasted of guilt. Every night of peaceful sleep felt like desertion. They were prisoners living better than their families, enemies thriving while their people starved. Letters from home made it worse. They arrived irregularly, delayed by weeks or months, censored by military authorities on both sides. But they came, and each one brought news that made the contrast more unbearable. Hamburg was rubble. Berlin was burning. Dresden was ash. Entire cities reduced to moonscapes. Civilians living in cellars. Children dying of malnutrition. The elderly freezing in buildings without roofs or windows. Disease spreading through populations with no access to medicine. And here in Mississippi, German prisoners were gaining weight, getting healthier, receiving treatment that would have saved countless lives back home. Clara received letters from her mother, each one more devastating than the last. The first, written in January, described the bombing. The second, from February, mentioned Sophie's infection with growing concern. The third arrived in early May, and it changed everything. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. Sergeant Mitchell made the announcement in the mess hall that evening. His voice was matter-of-fact, professional, showing neither triumph nor sympathy. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. You will remain here until arrangements can be made for repatriation. But the fighting is finished. The women sat in stunned silence. No crying, no wailing, no dramatic displays of emotion. Just numbness. The blank shock of having everything you believed in collapse in a single sentence. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years. All the propaganda about inevitable victory, about German superiority, about the weakness of democracy and the strength of will, all of it had been lies. Comfortable lies that made suffering bearable, that gave meaning to loss, that promised ultimate vindication. Now there was no vindication, only defeat, only the knowledge that every sacrifice had been for nothing. Every death had been meaningless. Every hardship had been in service of a delusion. Clara sat alone at a table, staring at the grain of the wood. Around her, other women processed the news in their own ways. Some looked relieved. The war was over. They had survived. Others looked devastated. Everything had been for nothing. She felt empty, hollowed out. Too much had happened too fast for her mind to absorb. Then a guard brought her a letter, postmarked April 15th, written by her mother 6 weeks earlier. Clara's hands shook as she opened it. She knew before reading the first line that it would be bad. Mothers only wrote certain kinds of letters with that much urgency, that much need to communicate before it was too late. She read, and the world ended. Clara, my daughter, I write this with hands that can barely hold the pen. Sophie is gone. She died on February 12th. The infection in her legs spread to her blood. We had no penicillin, no antibiotics of any kind. The doctor said with medicine she would live. Without it, she would die. We had nothing to give her. She suffered for 4 days, screaming, begging us to make it stop. We could not even give her morphine for the pain. She was 18 years old. She never had a chance to live, to love, to be anything except a victim of this terrible war. Before she died, she called your name. She wanted you there. She wanted her sister, who was a nurse, who could have saved her. But you were not there, and I could not save her. I could only hold her hand and watch her die. If you are alive, Clara, stay where you are. There is nothing here but death and ruins. Do not come home. There is no home to come to. Your mother. Clara read the letter 3 times, then a fourth. The words did not change. Sophie was dead, had been dead for almost 3 months, while Clara was here, being treated, taking antibiotics, getting healthy, the same antibiotics that would have saved Sophie's life. The irony was so perfect it felt designed, cruel, like the universe itself was mocking her. She stood slowly, walked out of the mess hall, made it 20 feet before her legs gave out. She collapsed against the side of a building, slid down the wall until she sat in the dirt, and she could not cry, could not scream, could not do anything except sit there with the letter in her hands and the knowledge that her sister had died in agony while she was being healed by the enemy. That was how Dr. Rodriguez found her an hour later. The doctor sat down beside Clara without speaking, did not ask questions, did not offer platitudes, just sat there in the gathering darkness, a quiet presence beside overwhelming grief. Finally, Clara spoke. Her voice was hoarse, empty. My sister is dead. I know, Dr. Rodriguez said softly. Sergeant Mitchell told me. She died from an infection, the same infection you cured in me. She died because Germany had no penicillin, and I lived because America gave it freely to prisoners. I am sorry. Are you? Clara's voice was not angry, just hollow. Why should you be sorry? You did your job. You saved my life. It is not your fault Sophie died. No, Dr. Rodriguez agreed, but I am still sorry, because you are in pain, and because the unfairness of who lives and who dies in war is something no one should have to face alone, Sham. They sat in silence. The Mississippi night was warm, humid. Insects sang in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played music. The world continued as if nothing had changed, as if a girl named Sophie had not screamed for 4 days before dying at 18. I do not want to live, Clara said. Not as a threat, not as a plea, just as a statement of fact. I understand, Dr. Rodriguez said, but you are going to anyway. Clara looked at her. Why? Because you are a survivor. Because you have purpose, whether you feel it right now or not. Because your sister would not want you to waste the life she did not get to have. You do not know what she would want. No, Dr. Rodriguez agreed, but I know what my sister would want. Carmen died 5 years ago, tuberculosis. I was a doctor. I could not save her. For months I felt like you feel now, guilty for living, angry at the unfairness, wishing I had died instead. She looked up at the stars beginning to appear. But then I realized something. My grief was real. My pain was valid. But my living did not cause her death. And my dying would not bring her back. The only way to honor her was to keep doing what she would have wanted me to do. Keep healing. Keep helping. Keep making her death mean something by making my life matter. Clara's throat was too tight to speak. You feel guilty for surviving, Dr. Rodriguez continued. That is normal. That is human. But Clara, listen to me. Your surviving is not a betrayal. Your being healthy is not an insult to Sophie's memory. The only betrayal would be wasting this chance, refusing to use this life you still have. I do not know if I can. You can, not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, one day at a time, one breath at a time. That is all anyone can do. She stood, offered her hand. Clara took it, let herself be pulled to her feet. Come to the infirmary tomorrow, Dr. Rodriguez said. Not for medicine, just to talk. You should not be alone right now. She walked away, leaving Clara standing in the darkness with a letter in her hand and a weight in her chest that felt like it would crush her. But she was still standing, still breathing, still alive whether she wanted to be or not. The next 3 days passed in a fog. Clara went through the motions, ate when told to eat, slept when exhaustion overwhelmed grief, spoke when spoken to. But she was not really there, just a shell going through expected behaviors while the person inside drowned in survivor's guilt and unanswerable questions. On the 4th night, Greta woke her just past midnight. Clara, come quickly. Something is wrong with Keita. Clara followed her outside, still half asleep. Behind the barracks, in the shadows between buildings, they found Keita sitting on the ground, her back against the wall, her left wrist bleeding. She had used a piece of broken glass. The cut was deep, but not immediately fatal. She had made it perhaps 10 minutes earlier, had been sitting there since watching the blood drip onto the dirt. Not crying, not making sound, just waiting. Clara's nurse training took over instantly. She tore fabric from her dress, wrapped it tight around Ketha's wrist, applied pressure. Get Sergeant Mitchell, she told Greta. Now. Greta ran. Clara kept pressure on the wound, looked into Ketha's eyes. They were empty, exhausted, done. Why did you stop me? Kathy asked. Her voice was flat, defeated. Because you do not get to quit, Clara said. None of us do. I have nothing left to live for. Then find something. The guards came. Mitchell assessed the situation, made the call. They carried Ketha to the infirmary. Dr. Thompson stitched the wound, set up an IV, saved her life despite her wishes. The next morning, Clara went to visit. Ketha lay in a hospital bed, pale, weak, her left wrist bandaged. She looked at Clara with eyes that held no fight, no certainty, no rigid conviction, just emptiness. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Clara pulled up a chair, sat down. "Because you are human, and because I understand pain." Silence. Then Keta began to speak. Slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. Words that had been held back by pride and fear, and the desperate need to maintain control finally spilling out. "My husband was SS, Klaus Vogler. I did not know what he did. I swear I did not know until they showed me the documents after I was captured. The photographs, the evidence." Her voice cracked. "Concentration camps, executions, thousands of people, Jews, Poles, Russians, children. He participated in all of it, and I was his wife. I shared his bed. I wore the uniform of the Reich with pride while he murdered innocents." Tears streamed down her face now. "My family disowned me. My mother wrote that they are ashamed, that they must pretend I died to avoid the stigma of being related to a war criminal's wife. I have nothing to go back to. No home, no family, no identity except the wife of a monster." She looked at Clara. "I fought against your treatment, not because I believed it was tricks. I fought because if the Americans were decent, if they were more human than Germans, then everything I believed was wrong. My husband was evil. My country was evil, and I was complicit. I could not accept that. So I fought, and I nearly killed that poor girl because I could not face the truth." Clara listened, said nothing, let Ketha speak. "I deserve to die," Ketha finished. "I deserve punishment. Not mercy, not healing, not another chance." Clara looked at the older woman, at the pain and guilt and self-hatred written in every line of her face. And Clara understood, because she carried similar weight, different circumstances, but the same crushing guilt of survival, of complicity, of loving people who did terrible things. "No," Clara said quietly, "you are not your husband. You did not do what he did. You did not know. I should have known." How, when the entire nation was built on lies, when questioning meant death, when belief was survival? She leaned forward. "Ketha, my sister, died because Germany had no medicine. You tried to kill yourself because you cannot forgive yourself for your husband's crimes. We are both carrying guilt for things beyond our control, but punishing ourselves will not bring back the dead, will not undo what happened, will not make anything better." "Then what do we do?" "We live," Clara said, "not because we deserve to, not because it is fair, but because we are still here. And the only way to honor those who died is to use the lives we still have to do better, to be better." Ketha closed her eyes. Fresh tears leaked out. "I do not know if I can." "Neither do I," Clara admitted, "but maybe we can try together." She reached out, took Ketha's hand. The older woman gripped it like a lifeline. And in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, not absolution, but recognition. Two women who had been enemies discovering they were both just broken humans trying to survive their own guilt. The months that followed brought slow healing, not just physical, but emotional, psychological, the kind that comes not from medicine, but from human connection. Clara and Ketha began talking, sharing stories, finding common ground in their pain. Ketha joined the group accepting medical treatment, not as surrender, but as choice, as acknowledgement that ideology was not worth dying for. The camp settled into new rhythms. Warm Mississippi summer, warm Mississippi, regular medical checkups, improving health, and underneath it all, the knowledge that eventually they would have to leave, have to return to Germany, have to face whatever remained of their homeland. October came, the air turned cooler, the pine trees began to change, and Sergeant Mitchell made an announcement. Ships would arrive in 2 weeks. Repatriation was beginning. Most of the women felt conflicted. They wanted to go home, wanted to find their families, wanted to return to familiar ground. But they also feared what they would find. The letters had prepared them for devastation. But reading about ruins and actually seeing them were different things. Dr. Thompson called 10 women to his office, those with medical training, nurses, lab technicians, assistance. Clara was among them. He explained that the U.S. Army needed medical staff for refugee programs in occupied Germany. 2-year contracts, good pay, housing, ability to bring family members into the program. Option to immigrate to America afterward if desired. It was tempting, safe employment, guaranteed food, protection, a chance to help rebuild from a position of security. But Clara said no. I need to go home as a German helping Germans, she explained, not as someone working for the occupation. My people need to see that healing is possible, that mercy exists, that we can rebuild, but they will not listen if they think I am just an American puppet. Dr. Thompson nodded slowly. I understand, but Clara, you will need supplies, resources. He handed her a package. Inside was a medical kit, stethoscope, thermometer, bandages, basic medicines, a medical textbook, a letter of recommendation on official U.S. Army letterhead. Take this, he said. Use it to help your people. Teach them what you learned here. Not just about medicine, but about seeing patients as human beings, about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Clara's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded. On her final day, she returned to the medical building one last time. Dr. Thompson examined her thoroughly, listened to her lungs, checked her heart, took her blood pressure. You are completely healthy, he said, better than when you arrived. The infection is gone. Your weight is good. Your blood pressure is normal. Physically, you have healed completely. He paused. But I worry about your heart, about the wounds that medicine cannot treat. Clara smiled sadly. Those will take longer to heal. Yes, he agreed, but they will heal. I believe that. You are strong, Clara, stronger than you know. He looked at her seriously. Germany is going to need nurses, good nurses, skilled nurses. But more than that, Germany is going to need people who remember what it means to be human, who remember that even enemies can show mercy, who understand that strength is not the same as cruelty. His voice grew intense. You learned something here, not just medical technique, but philosophy, approach. You learned to see patients as people, to treat everyone with dignity, to choose healing over hatred. That lesson is more valuable than any medicine I could give you. He reached out and shook her hand, not as captor and prisoner, not as enemy and enemy, but as two medical professionals showing mutual respect. Take care of yourself, Clara, and take care of Germany. The world needs a better Germany, and maybe you can help build it. Clara left the medical building for the last time, walked across the compound to the barracks, gathered her few possessions, the medical kit from Dr. Thompson, the letter from her mother she could not bring herself to throw away, the journal Dr. Rodriguez had given her, a photograph of the medical staff that Sergeant Mitchell had taken. Kathy approached as she was packing. I am staying, the older woman said. Clara looked up surprised. The VA hospital in town needs staff. They offered me a position, caring for American veterans, men damaged by war, men who need help. She smiled sadly. I cannot go back to Germany. I have no family. My name is associated with crimes I did not commit but cannot escape. But here I can do something useful. I can help. I can make some small amends for what Klaus did. It will never be enough, but it is something. Clara understood. Sometimes going home was not possible. Sometimes you had to build a new home from the pieces of a shattered life. They embraced. Two women who had been enemies, who had fought over medicine and meaning, who had nearly destroyed each other before learning to save each other instead. Thank you, Kathy whispered, for not letting me die, for showing me that mercy is possible even when we do not deserve it. We all deserve mercy, Clara said. That is what I learned here. That is what I will take home. 2 weeks later, Clara stood on the deck of a ship crossing the Atlantic. 58 women traveled with her. 2 had stayed behind, Keita at the VA hospital, another working with the Red Cross. The ocean was gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds. But ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, was Germany, or what was left of it. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the morning she stood outside a medical building, expecting torture, and received healing instead, about Dr. Thompson and Dr. Rodriguez, and even Sergeant Mitchell, about Keita and Lena, and all the others who had walked this path with her. She thought about Sophie, about the sister who had died screaming while Clara was being saved, about the terrible unfairness of survival, about the guilt that would never fully leave. But she also thought about choice, about what she would do with this second chance, about the nurses she would train, the patients she would treat, the mercy she would show because mercy had been shown to her. The German coastline appeared through the mist, gray, broken, devastated. But Clara Weber was not the same woman who had left. That woman had believed in propaganda, had trusted that her side was right and the enemy was wrong, had thought in simple categories of German and American friend and foe, us and them. The woman returning had learned something more profound, had learned that humanity transcends nationality, that mercy is stronger than revenge, that choosing to heal is more powerful than choosing to hate. She opened her medical bag. Inside was the stethoscope Dr. Thompson had given her, the textbook, the supplies, the tools of her profession. But more than that, she carried something invisible, a lesson learned in the most unlikely place, from the most unlikely teachers, that even in war, even when every reason exists for cruelty, some people choose kindness. That even when hatred seems justified, mercy is possible. That even when enemies face each other, they can choose to see human beings instead. She closed her eyes, not in fear this time, but in memory, in gratitude, in acknowledgement of what she had received. Close your eyes and don't scream, they had said. She had closed her eyes expecting horror. When she opened them, she found humanity, and that changed everything. The ship docked. Clara stepped onto German soil, around her ruins, ahead of her work, inside her purpose. She would heal, she would teach, she would remember. And perhaps in remembering, she would help build something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Not perfect, not pure, but human, flawed and trying, broken and healing. Just like her, the journey home had ended. The real work was just beginning.